Is it recording? Perfect. Super. Want to make sure that's working. Great. Well, hi, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. I'm Susan Mahaffee, and I am joined here by Francisco. We've been doing a few webinars these days. As Amy mentioned, I am the founder of PeopleRise. We are a fractional HR consultancy, and I help small business owners, entrepreneurs, family-led owned businesses as well with all of your HR needs. And our goal is really to make your systems and your processes simple and easy. And then, of course, when you get those sticky situations, I'm happy to help and work through that with you. And if it becomes so cumbersome or so sticky and we need some employment help, that's when we call our friend Francisco. So I'll hand it to you, Francisco, on that note.
Thank you, Susan. And, I thank you for the introduction. So my name is Francisco Mundaca. I'm the founder of the Mundaca Law Firm. We specialize in helping guide small to mid-sized businesses in compliance. And of course, if the need arises, which is unfortunate, litigation, we have specialization in employment law as well. So that goes right to the heart of what we're discussing here today. And I look forward to chatting with all of you.
Great. We might have a couple of folks joining in later. So let's just do a quick share in the chat. We'll look for you all to give us an answer. So just type 1, 2, or 3 in the chat just to give us a sense. How confident are you with your contractor classifications? So if you're not sure what classifies or what means I can have a contractor or I should hire a contractor versus hiring an employee, that's basically the question. So if you're not really sure and you're really kind of starting off, that's a 1. If you think you're okay because you have some and you understand it a bit, that would be a 2. And 3, if you feel like you're so good at this, you could be teaching the webinar. Give us a 3 in the chat. So I think we have some answers going on here. Okay, got some 1s, some 2s. Awesome. Okay, perfect. And Christine said there was a lag on her side as well. Okay, well, hi, Christine. It's good to see you again. So let me go to the next slide. So the way we're going to do today is we've got 3 informational slides, and then we're actually going to walk through some scenarios. And our goal for today is really to give you some information, so some powerful information about some things that have recently changed. Because a lot of what we're seeing and hearing is a lot of what we used to know about contractors and what used to be and what qualified as having a contractor versus an employee. And we really want to make sure that you've got some information to understand that because things have changed and they continue to change. And as you said, Amy, with the deficits and all of the things like that, it's very easy for the Department of Labor to run a report and decide where they want to focus some of their intentionality of who they want to audit and then some. So we want to make sure that you have all of the information to make some informed decisions for your business. So why does this matter? So there's kind of 4 things here. And Francisco, I'm going to ask you if you can kind of just touch on these briefly, because clearly this is where the enforcement area in particular and what you've seen in your experience happens.
Absolutely. So, one of the most common triggers is, of course, the classification error. Now, just to add a little asterisk to that, while we're here analyzing 1099 versus W-2, a lot of these aren't just blind audits. What we're seeing on the litigation side is this stems out from in another matter. So potentially, unpaid wage or a discrimination lawsuit. So once the line is entered into the water, using a fishing analogy, it creates inquiries. And so the investigator then starts to dig. And so if they're digging, they start asking. And, typically the way an investigator works is very much like an attorney. So they'll ask a series of questions. And when there's something there that gets their attention, they'll start asking more. And that's what triggers a more broad audit. And that, we see that happened with one of our clients actually in the last 2 weeks. A complaint was made, then an audit was triggered, and then enter, our firm to work through that. So, classification errors are certainly a trigger of audit. Now, enforcement is increasing, as Amy mentioned and Susan, reiterated, anytime there's a deficit, of course, our state agencies, particularly in Maryland and anywhere else, honestly, will start to look for leaks and ways that they can impose fines and penalties, which we'll go into over the course of today. And some of these penalties are very harsh. On top of tax liability, there's also double and treble damages that apply, which is really devastating to a small and even a mid-sized business. But the classification does affect taxes, benefits, overtime, and liability, and therein lies the meat on the bone. That's why this is so important for business owners to understand, because it's much more than just the payroll tax that you didn't pay. If in fact, there's just so many legs to this. And so while I think the natural, inclination is to hire a 1099 because it's easier, it's one check, maybe I'm not paying payroll taxes, which is what every business owner has to conceptually think about and what has been happening for years. But what really starts to happen is that while it may be easier and less expensive now, it's going to be two times and three times more expensive down the road. And that's not even factoring attorney's fees, which, I'll be the first to say attorneys are not inexpensive. So, just some general ideas for us to start today's conversation.
Absolutely. And Francisco, I think you also have seen this a bit too, is that a lot of times when I'm talking to clients of mine, they will use what they used to understand or that they used to think were the rules, which a lot of times was including just like exempt and non-exempt status, whether or not this person is managerial, whether or not this person is working for them a short period of time. And as we'll get into in a few slides, there's a lot of different factors now, and not just one is determinative. So I just wanted to see if you wanted to add anything more to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Every state has a different analysis. So let's make things more complicated, right? The IRS looks at three factors, which we're going to get into, and it's a broad analysis. Maryland further constricts that and looks at a particular test called economic realities. Different states that I practice in have their own unique analysis there. So they don't make it easy. But ultimately, I think if you're following a general guideline, you're more likely than not to violate the law. So it is important to stay abreast of the changes in your particular jurisdiction, and in this case, for Maryland.
Absolutely. So on that note, we've got something here that we call some indicators to help decide. Now, this is from a federal standpoint, so I want to make sure that I contextualize that as well. So this is an actual graphic that comes from the Department of Labor. And so this is from a federal standpoint. And what I do think happens here in this slide, which I think is helpful, one of the more helpful things that we actually got from the DOL is helping you have some indicators. And I want to be really clear and underscore the word indicator. I'm sure you'd say the same, Francisco, right? So just because you see this graphic does not always mean that it's 100%. Oh, I saw it on the internet. This is also where I think we would both emphasize that having some guidance, especially for your type of business, is key. We're going to give you some scenarios later, but again, having just a little bit of knowledge on the front end can go a really long way and keep your business safer by knowing that information. So you'll see on the left-hand side indicators of an employee, and on the right, you'll see indicators of an independent contractor, which is what we call 1099s, because 1099 is the actual document you get at the end of the year that essentially you file on your own. So that's where those references come from. I know that all of you can read this, so what I'd like to do is just kind of highlight a few things. One of the things that we see a lot of times with employees is that when you are working for someone else's business, so if you came to work for me, if you came to work for someone else, they have a business. In a lot of cases, you've got a brick and mortar, you've got a full-fledged organization, and there's probably a lot of people there. If someone is an independent contractor and they're in business for themselves, so they own their own business like many of us do, right? We are in business and we're gaining the clients ourselves. We have a specific expertise, and you may do something very unique yourself, and that's why you started your organization. There's also a thing here where what you'll see is that if you work for multiple clients, meaning you own your own business, you work for multiple people, you make your own hours, you usually work on a project basis. You start and you agree on a scope of work. Everybody signs it. We all have the same understanding. You're going to pay me a certain fee. I'm going to use my equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And then I deliver it to you. And then thanks for your time. And, we conclude and then I keep moving. That's often one of the kind of, again, simpler ways to explain one of the elements of working as your own business, as an independent contractor. And you're using your own materials and equipment. And we'll also get into some details about whether or not, you're wearing your own kind of like uniform. So when I'm out, I'm wearing something that has my business name on it and I'm representing my company. And I also get to decide what projects I take on. So if I'm an independent contractor, if I don't think that work aligns with my business or what have you, even complicated clients, I've got the full right to say no. If you're an employee and you get instructed, hey, this is your project, I mean, we're looking for you to complete it. That's part of your employment. So on the other hand, indicators of an employee, usually you're working for one person. They're giving you hours, they're giving you a schedule, they're telling you when they need you to show up. And so that's your primary employment. That's usually where you are being told, I'm going to get a full-time job, I'm going to have 40 hours a week, I show up, I get insurance, I get all these other benefits and so on. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the typical things that you would normally see between an employee versus a 1099. Francisco, anything you'd add to this graphic here?
No, I think this graphic's great. I think just keep in mind, these are just guidelines, and so the weight of each indicator is going to be very contingent on what's actually happening, and so it's not, just well, I check this box because I'm working within it. No, there's going to be follow-up questions. So just, I'd say, make the effort to look at these indicators and just walk through it. And, most people can do this on their own. And I think, of course, if there's any chance of, if there's any question on it, then more likely than not, you're treading that line. And if you're in that gray area for a lot of these indicators, the argument can be made that the individual is a W-2.
Absolutely. So the next and final slide on kind of us sharing with you some of the information. I'm going to hand this to you, Francisco, to talk about these two types of kind of the tests and the analysis.
Yeah, so what we're discussing here is so totality of the circumstances, so an economic realities test. So this is what I was gleaning on earlier today, and there is an analysis to this. So here, we list six primary factors. The first being the opportunity for proper profit and loss with respect to managerial skill, investments by the worker and the potential employer. These things are, very broad in nature. And so we're looking at, did you invest in supplies? Are you paying for the supplies for the individual? As Susan mentioned, are they wearing your logo on their uniform? The degree of permanence of the work relationship. I mean, that's not that simple. Of course, I think in the general sense of 1099s, it's per project. So someone's coming in to help you, let's say a videographer, to help you create a commercial or an ad for your business. And once they're done, they provide the deliverable, the engagement is finished. That is clear 1099. There is a payment, there's usually an agreement between the two parties, of course, between your business and the contractor, and the scope of the project completes. The end of the relationship is obvious. Now, if there is an ongoing relationship, now that gets a little bit, that starts at you start asking questions. Well, is this videographer doing other projects with other businesses? And so then you have to start going into these factors. And that's where I think this is why we want to impress upon everyone that this is just a guideline, and you want to ask these follow-up questions. Now, the nature and degree of control by the employer. Does the employer, okay, so one very common example that I see in my practice, and Susan, tell me if you've seen this as well, is a cleaning service. cleaning service will hire individuals as a 1099, but often these cleaning services have their logo on here. They're providing materials and supplies to the individual who's cleaning the homes. They tell them you're going to go to this location at 10 a.m. and you're going to follow up at 12. Well, guess what? It's starting to sound a lot like a W-2 to me. And so, I understand that there's of course a human element to this that, we can't charge that much over the margins are really thin. If we start paying payroll on this, we're not going to have any profit. I get it. But I think, this analysis this is like low-hanging fruit for the Department of Labor. They're going to look to these types of companies as well. I even see this to some extent in the contracting business. I think that's very prevalent there. A lot of our contractors have a lot of, there's just the nature is, of course, you're a contractor, your focus is on building a great product and making your clients happy, of course, your customers. But, the same analysis applies to the extent of which the work is performed and the integral part of an employer's business. So again, let's say you are a law firm and you hire a videographer, and this videographer, I mean, that's a very different skill set. You're not naturally going to have a videographer in house there. But let's say you're a marketing company or you're multimedia. Now they're doing work that tends to go towards the practice that you're in. That's a question, right? You're gonna ask more questions about that person. Well, are they only working for you? How many other clients does that person have? Does that contractor have their own insurance? These are all questions that start to come up. And so I think, it's really important. And then the skill and initiative, it's of the work that's being done. It goes into just standard analysis. I mean, is this someone who specializes in this work? Are they trained? Are you training them? Are you overseeing their work? Because when I hire a contractor to do work, let's say at my home, I'm not telling them how to measure and cut. I'm just watching, I'm making sure they're doing it. I'm writing a check. But if I'm there teaching them, showing them, now the argument can be made is now I'm in control, which goes to, again, as I mentioned, the IRS has its own test, and it's much more simple, but it leaves a lot of shades of gray. So behavioral control, financial control, and relationship. And so, hopefully that provides some guidance and doesn't muddy up the waters too much. But I think that shows the importance of these things.
Francisco, there's two other things I wanted to raise because I know
Mhm.
that they're usually questions or things that I've heard quite a bit. One of them is around seasonal flexing. So a lot of times we have heard clients share with us, oh, I like, let's take our cleaning business because I have those clients as well. We were talking about this. If you should encounter a surge, for example, busy times, maybe it's the holidays, maybe it's Thanksgiving, we everybody calls because they need that help and they need that extra work. A lot of times businesses will say, I need to have some flexible arrangements so that if I need to call in extra support because I don't want to turn that business away, that is something, one, you're able to do, and two, that doesn't preclude that you can't use contractors. However, um, it's likely it would make more sense, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, is going to be that business may be somebody who, if you're calling, let's say you've got 3 or 4 people who you have on a list, those may be people who own their own cleaning business and they're able to help and provide you support because they have the extra manpower, they've got extra resources, they bring their own materials, and you're going to say, hey, this is how much I can pay you per home, this is the length of the agreement, I just need you in December, et cetera, et cetera. How would you add to that, Francisco, as well, especially on the seasonal surge side?
Yeah, it's a great point. Seasonal searches, I think in the example that you just provided, that's very definitive, right? They're bringing in their own things. That's a contractor. The scope is limited. There is a term in mind. Whereas, if you didn't add those elements, I'd say you're discussing potentially a part-time employee. And I think that that's, a challenge for a lot of business owners is that how do I find someone who can work a limited amount of hours who works hard during that time, then you start looking more towards a full-time employee, but finances may not permit that. So I think this is where that analysis comes into play. if it's a definitive term, if they're in control, if they have their own business, even better. That makes a huge difference. But I think it's something that every business owner has to approach, irrespective of volume. It's, what do I need? How long is it going to last? How can I memorialize this relationship to show its independence of my business? Because the worker does, in fact, have to be independent of yours. So I think those are critical questions that everyone should cross.
Yes, including the memorialization, which would include some kind of contract, which I know both of us are big proponents of. Please don't use AI. Please don't say you got it from your friend. And, some people do this with their handbooks. They do this with their contractor agreements. I've heard people say, "Oh, I work in the design field, and I want to have." Literally, I had a client tell me, "I like my documents to look pretty." And I said to her, well, looking pretty, and I understand you have an aesthetic and that's your business, but that doesn't mean that it's compliant because you bought it off the internet as a template from another design firm. That doesn't mean, number one, it's compliant, doesn't mean that it's applicable to your business or even your state where you work or any of the other things that could be part of that. So I know that you also agree with me there heavily. We know these things aren't inexpensive, but you're, going back to, you're going to pay now or you're going to pay later. And I would assume many of you would agree, if not all of you, that having the confidence of knowing that you've sought out to make sure that these things that you're providing people in any kind of form are compliant will go a long way, so that if you were to be questioned or asked or have an audit, you would be prepared. It'll save you a lot of headache. The other thing, Francisco, was around, we got this question in the last time we did this webinar, which was around insurance. And this was around, I've had situations where clients will say they're a contractor, and if they don't have insurance, we will deduct 5% from their fee to pay for insurance for them. Or if they get hurt, and they don't have insurance, that's not on us. They signed the agreement, it's 1099. So could you share a little bit of your insight there as well?
Ooh, insurance. Wow, that's like a whole webinar in and of itself. Well, I
Yes.
think the big idea is that insurance companies can deny claims, right? There's I'm sure we've all seen the encyclopedia, the size contract and binders that we receive, and I think the way we look at it is, and the way I approach every client that we speak to is that you can become a defendant very easily. Now, whether claims will hold water is another story. Can you be sued? Is yes, absolutely, without merit. And you're going to be forced to defend a suit until that aspect is resolved. But insurance companies, especially with wage issues, there's a lot here that's covered. And I think what's even scarier is that this really starts to shade over into how we run our business from day to day. Because if the business is not being run, and it's maybe potentially an extension of ourselves, now we're losing corporate protection, which is piercing the corporate veil. Then our own personal pockets may be attached. So I think the insurance aspect is one that's very broad, and if we should not be paying for their insurance, they should be covering it on their own, and that's something that the contractor should be bargaining for. If they don't have it, well, I'm going to have to charge another X amount so that I can provide insurance, and I think that just creates more delineation and separation in the roles that we're seeking.
Absolutely. So hopefully that also helps all of you understand a little bit more, maybe some situations that you've already been faced with. So we're going to go into 3 scenarios next. And what we want to do is hear from you all what you think. So in the chat, we'll ask you to put in either W-2 or 1099 just to make it simple. And we'll give you the fact pattern. So here we've got Sarah, who's the marketing manager. And here's the thing about Sarah. She runs marketing for your company. She works about 30 hours a week. She has a company email. She goes to your team meetings. You pay her every hour. And she's worked with you for 14 months, so a little bit over a year, but she doesn't work for other clients. So she just works for you. So the question is, Would you treat this person as a 1099 or contractor? And Francisco, what is your answer?
All right, well, I just want to make sure everyone answers here. But Sarah sounds like an employee. I think, in terms of, and I think this is an interesting thing that I've seen in my practice as well. You're asking a contractor to come to your business meetings, to your weekly meetings, and then there's repetition, there's pattern. That's a little bit dangerous, right? Because now it's going to say, well, tell me more, because I'm going to keep asking questions now. And the 14 months, I mean, clearly it doesn't seem that there is a definite term, and then does not work for other clients. There's an argument that exclusivity exists. So, yeah, this to me reads like a W-2 employee.
It looks like everyone in the webinar also got it right too. We've got a lot of W-2 in there. All right, wonderful. So let's go to our second scenario. So this is Mike. Mike's our IT manager. He works for you, but he owns his own company. He has 10 clients. You hired him to upgrade your cybersecurity system. Maybe you got hacked. That Mike is paid per project. He has his own equipment, and he comes to you when he wants. So he sets his own schedule. So what is the answer? Contractor or W-2 employee?
All right, I'll just give it a few seconds, but it looks like everyone is on the right track. This is a 1099 contractor. Mike is doing it the right way. Your business is doing it the right way. There is clear separation here. It checks a lot of the boxes that we just discussed, and I would see no issue with this engagement.
All right, so let's see our third one here. So Javier is our sales rep. Oh, I wrote Jessica. Works for you, paid commission only, represents your brand exclusively. So when Javier goes out and is going and calling on customers, they're wearing your logo. They use your customer relationship management system, has a company email, has worked for you for 3 years, and you ask Javier to attend your sales meetings. So let's see what we've got. Okay, this one we've got a little bit of a kind of a mixed bag here. Francisco, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I like the responses. So that means there's conversation here. So in terms of this, to me Javier is a W-2 employee. And I want to just this is a great time to mention the meetings. Now, if you tell someone they may attend a meeting, that's okay. Whether they decide to or not shouldn't implicate or create a negative work connotation. Now, the requirement working for 3 years, the company email. Again, this is like an extension of wearing the logo on their clothing for marketing purpose, using your CRM, which is an internal software. And then the exclusivity, again, that's a key buzzword that we want to look at. The commission, the pay structure is to me is irrelevant. We can have a contract that says that you are a 1099, but if everything else is leaning towards W-2, that contract is not going to define the role.
Yeah, it goes back to the list we saw right before.
Mm.
Great. So we liked a little one that had some difference, wasn't as clear. So now we want to hand it all over to all of you and ask if you have any questions. You can either put it in the chat or ask us. And then Amy, I saw you came off mute. If there's any questions for us.
I was just going to ask one on that last scenario, just because, like, long term, that's probably where we would end up hiring like a sales commission person only for the chamber. But if they had a chamber email, but we were contractual, but they had the flexibility to do it on their own schedule, they could take on other clients. That would be 1099, or would it still be questionable if they
I,
had a chamber email, had access to our CRM so they could input people, but they're just hustling the streets and bringing in new members?
yeah, I
Can I
think,
do that as 1099?
you can. Now, the question is, do they have other clients? And if they don't have any now, but there's flexibility in what they're looking to do. And I can understand it's not, and this is never a perfect scenario. There isn't a perfect puzzle piece, but I think it's something to check in with. If we're looking to start someone as a 1099, I would ask them frequently, or do you have other clients? Do you have other employees? Look at how much they're working. You're going to want to take that next step. And I think if there's any question, reach out to Susan or myself to help you answer that. But I think on its face, at that juncture, that's a question we'll want to revisit.
Hmm.
How long is this relationship going to last? How are you paying them? Is it per? I think that structure is going to matter too.
Yeah.
Very much. Yeah.
We have a question. What's the difference between 1099 miscellaneous and 1099 NEC?
I think you're talking about the actual forms, the documents that you get at the end of the year, Roxana. So 1099 employees are, if you've kind of followed the fact pattern we've talked about, that's kind of talking about whether or not they are, I'll call it permitted, eligible. What would you use, Francisco? Whether or not they're a contractor employee, that's kind of about classification. The
Mhm.
documents of how we give them I'll call it a report, right? It's their
Mhm.
summary of how they earn income. And so that's a tax form. And so that would be the difference. For example, also, if you're an S Corp, I mean, I got to go back and tell clients, hey, you don't have to give me a 1099, form anymore because I'm an S Corp and you don't need to do that. So also when you're actually doing these documents and in the contractual agreements, usually you're saying what you will require from that contractual relationship. Am I right, Francisco?
Yes, yes, I agree with you completely. Yeah, I think we're looking at IRS designations there, so that's kind of going outside of the analysis from the legal perspective, and now you're going into the world of accountants. And so I think in terms of the forms that you're going to use, you're going to want to consult with your tax professional. I don't pretend to play an accountant, so I'll usually defer on those topics with the CPAs.
Is the
I
dollar
can't.
amount for that still, was it 600? If is that still the
Yes,
same? Okay.
yes, it is.
Yeah, $600 is still the same. I had I had a fact sheet here. And so NEC is supposed to mean non-employee compensation. So it is the $600. And that's when you talk about consultants, freelancers, coaches, 1099s. The MISC is supposed to be other types of payments, legal settlements, prizes and awards, rent. So that's kind of any other thing. I will tell you, I get people who send me 1099 miscs all the time instead of an NEC. I mean, my view is you're reporting it, you're giving it to your tax advisor, making that happen. But NEC is means specifically not employee compensation. Great question. Anything else from you all?
What is the range of the fines that businesses are looking at, or does it just depend if
Yeah,
they
that's
get
a scary,
like
scary question.
per employee? One thing I see in the chamber, so when businesses apply for membership, it's based on employee. So I can see a lot of, especially in our roofing category, where they're like, oh no, they apply at the 325 solo entrepreneur, right? I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure it's not just you. Oh, well, everyone's contracted. But
Yeah.
even like for roofing, that's like, I mean, I can get it for maybe a general contractor building a house where you have to have a plumber in, but roofing is pretty, they're roofers. And they're
Yeah,
just roofing and they're wearing your uniform and driving your trucks and
that's a great question, and I actually just went through this with a roofer about 2 weeks ago, and so I guess what are the penalties? Unfortunately, there isn't a set penalty. So the way they'll look at this, and so I think we're just going to look at it in two lenses. One, you have the individual wage issue, the misclassification, the penalties, and then if you have in the broad nature, you could be if you're a mid-sized company, you could be subject to class and collective actions, which is where the big money comes in. That'll bury a small to mid-sized company for sure. It's very hard to come out of that. So what do they look at? So they're going to include unpaid wages, whether they're overtime, whether there's treble damages, and attorney's fees. And what I mean by treble damages is they take the number that you have, so the lost wages, the failure, the lost benefits in the monetary sense, because you didn't, of course, provide them with health insurance. And then they times it by three. Now, they also add in attorney's fees. Attorney's fees is on the table. That is, and that's really where the numbers start getting high. So if you think on its face, well, this person only earns, $15 an hour. Okay, well then that's fine, and then you can extrapolate out from there. But the benefits will increase it, then you can multiply it by three, and then you add an attorney who's billing at $500 an hour, and that number is what your what your penalty will be. And this is just from, the tax sense. You're going to have the Department of Labor, you're going to have insurance, your workers' compensation is not being paid. You're going to have penalties there too. And so, the roofing question is, yeah, what we're seeing is a lot of general contractors. And it's a one person show, maybe two, but then they're subcontracting everything else. This is when our analysis comes into play. Well, how are they being paid? As Amy mentioned, if they're on the roof with your logo on a polo shirt, well, we're starting to head down that employee route. And I think some of the things that we see is that, a lot of contractors, and I'll use the roofing, they're trying to contract their way out of the relationship, and that doesn't work. And I think that, we have to be cognizant of the liability, as we mentioned before earlier, the insurance aspects. I mean, that's huge, tremendous. And that's where you'll get a lot of failed claims where the provider is saying, well, why did you hire an unlicensed contractor? Or why did you hire someone who didn't have insurance? Why is it our responsibility to pay for your recklessness? And they'll deny your claim. So I think, these are really important questions, and information to get out there.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess from a consumer standpoint too, you want to make sure you're hiring a roofer that you know is insured,
Yeah.
not putting it off on their contractors that may or may not be insured.
That's an amazing point too. I mean, so that actually touches on, the MHIC, they're looking at it in terms of they want to protect the consumer, right? Like you're hiring someone who has a license to do a very specific job, which you're in your roofing business, it's a lot of money, right? And then what happens in some of these scenarios, the contractor, the licensed party will hire a subcontractor who's not licensed to do the work. You've
Mhm.
got a major liability issue, potential negligence if something happens. And so I think now we're going through like five different sets of analysis, but I think that just shows the importance of this and making sure you get this right.
Yep.
I think it proves on both sides, right? So not just who you're hiring, but also who you're also contracting with, even in your outside the professional side. I know I hired somebody to take down a tree, and you can find somebody who can take it down for cheap, who's willing to climb the tree. But when it falls on someone's house or something else, someone's going to be responsible for it. I wanted to just raise one other question, which was around some of the industries where we're seeing a lot of. I know Christina said that she owns a therapy practice. So, as it relates to people in the, and I know Christine is in the medical aesthetics practice. So, you've got people who are licensed, so they have their own licensure. They also have they might work at multiple locations or, multiple practices and things like that, but also I'm thinking of it in the sense of, let's say I want to go and be seek therapy services, and as an individual, and then I'm coming to Christina's practice, and she assigns someone to me that look like Francisco on 1099 versus employees. So there seems like there's a little bit there. You might work for multiple practices, but then you're representing, oh, I work for this therapy practice on Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, I work on my own. Maybe a little thought on that.
Yeah, I think if in that scenario where you're hiring other providers to see patients, under your umbrella, if they have their own practice, if they're seeing patients outside of just the four corners of your own business, and I think that does hold towards a 1099 relationship. Of course, the other analysis would continue to apply, but that in and of itself is quite common, and you'll start seeing that especially in that industry that some providers are not exclusive to this one practice. Now, again, if you require exclusivity, well, now you're going back into the W-2 analysis. So it's an open question that will require just ongoing analysis from the business owner.
Great. Christina says thanks.
Any other questions? All right.
No?
Well, thank you guys so much. I did, Francisco and Susan are pairing up again for another webinar in May. You guys want to talk about
Yeah.
that? Oh, there we go.
Look, I put a little like business emerging business award here for
Oh,
you.
look at you. You did.
Thank you. Wow, that
Nice.
looks
There you
amazing.
go. Yeah, so we're teaming up. We're going to be having a webinar about cannabis in the workplace, and obviously another example of differences between federal laws where the answer is absolutely no, and in states like Maryland where it's considered legal in some ways. But I think Francisco, you said something to me that was interesting, and I thought it was a good one. It's not your God-given right to smoke cannabis. So hey. You need to understand what the laws and the rules are.
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that I think a lot of people are especially in Maryland are dealing with, whether they know it or not. And I think, whether something is permissible by law is one thing, but whether you can operate and do certain jobs under the influence of something is another. So I think, because now here back to the insurance liability aspect. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's still evolving, so there isn't definitive answers, but one that I look forward to.
Absolutely. So that is going to be, I believe it's on May 7th. So look for that as well, right, Amy?
Yep, I think we got it on the calendar and it'll be in the newsletter.
Perfect. 10 o'clock on May 7th.
Wonderful. All right. Well, with that, thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you all for attending. And Susan will follow up with an email with the deck that they presented, and we'll send you the link for the recording to all those that registered and couldn't make it. So hope everybody has a good rest of your, what is today? Today's Wednesday, right? Yes.
Wednesday.
Who knows? Who knows?
Hump day. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah,
Thank you.
same to
Thanks,
you. Thank you
everybody.
so much, everyone. Thank you, Amy.
Thank
Thanks, Susan.
you.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Brooke.
Take care.